Perhaps you could tell us what he did. Hongniang, we should listen to what Maomao has to say instead of dismissing her out of hand. And Maomao, you need to stay calm and explain. At that, Maomao felt the rush of blood to her head subside. She let out a small sigh and composed herself. Then she turned to Jiakayu and Hongniang. This person was a eunuch and a medical officer. He was responsible for delivering the current ruler and the current heir apparent. He also delivered Lady Ardu's child. Regarding his banishment from the rear palace, I have heard the reason somehow involved consort Arduo. Maomao did not fully understand the reason. It would not be accurate to say she could not guess what happened, but she wasn't certain. She wasn't about to offer wild speculation. I see. So that's it, Jiakayu said. She seemed to have already known this, which was not surprising. She was an upper consort living in the rear palace because the emperor favored her. She would surely have heard stories. And if I may ask, how is this person related to you, Maomao? She sounded less concerned with his status as a criminal than with what kind of person he actually was. He's my adoptive father, as well as my teacher in matters of medicine. Jiakayu closed her eyes for a second, thinking, then opened them again. All right. I will suggest it to Sir Jinshi. Lady Jiakayu, Hongniang exclaimed, but the consort only smiled. Hongniang, I want to surround myself with capable people and make the best use of them. If they are trustworthy as well, all the better. He cannot be a bad person if our stray cat has taken such a shine to him. A stray cat, huh? That is nice. But he is a criminal. Yes, that is what they say. However, you must have heard a few tales of how the rear palace was in those days. How many were purged during the reign of the great empress? Are you telling me you will accept such criticism without question? Her words were gentle but insistent. Maomao thought of the empress regnant. She was quite a presence to invoke. If you are still uncomfortable, we can have him kept under watch. Would that be a fair compromise? Jiakayu said. Then she took paper and brush from the table and started writing a letter to Jinshi. 2 days after bringing up the matter with Hongniang, a grandmotherly individual appeared at the rear palace. Maomao was surprised. They had moved quicker than she expected. Gaoshan accompanied Maomao's old man as he paid his respects at the Jade Pavilion. After that they headed to the medical office. He would be with the quack doctor for a while. Maomao's father loved cats, so she thought the kitten's fur would become even more lustrous. She had first worried about what would happen to the doctor if her father arrived. However, it seemed there was no need to worry about that, at least for now. Her old man's admission to the rear palace had been an emergency measure, a compromise after all. She was glad about that at least. Without him, there would be no physician worthy of the name in the pleasure district. Perhaps it wasn't her place to be concerned about that, considering she had suggested the idea to begin with. But she worried that if he wasn't back home by the turn of the year, the old madam might come storming into the rear palace to drag him back herself. Such were the thoughts occupying her mind as she worked at cleaning the Jade Pavilion. Perhaps because of her old man's visit, all the chores had been packed into today. They all had to work diligently. Yinghua came up hauling a fresh bucket of water. So that guy, he's your dad, right, Maomao? She asked. Yeah, Yinghua looked puzzled. Technically, Liumen was Maomao's granduncle. However, the two of them looked nothing alike. This was probably the source of Yinghua's confusion. Maomao was content to let the subject lie. Trying to explain further would only be a pain. He's just Yinghua searched for the words. Not how I pictured him at all. I guess you could say he is almost normal. I wonder, is this really the guy who raised Maomao? And what exactly were you imagining? Ahem. Well, you know. He seems downright Gyuan, and Sekiyu, who were working alongside them, nodded along with Yinghua. Hakuyu did not know Maomao very well yet, and she was simply listening to the conversation with a grin on her face. Sensible, Yinghua concluded, for sure. Gyuan and Sekiyu agreed in unison. I will never understand these people, Maomao thought. For the life of her she could not imagine what they had been expecting. Chapter 7, Festering Resentment, Part 1. Life, it seemed, was fun and fancy-free at the medical office at the moment. Now this little kitten, she is a smart cookie, the quack was saying. She loves fish, but she won't eat the head, tail, or innards. It had only been a few days, but he seemed to understand perfectly well that he would never be able to teach Liumen anything about medicine. Instead, He stuck entirely to non-medical topics on which he perceived he had some measure of authority. And Maomao's old man, ever personable, reacted with appropriate interest to the quack's every observation. Maomao thought the loach moustache looked a little perkier than usual. Indeed, her father was being himself. He said, "It is her loss. I rather enjoy this bitter flavour myself." He took a piece of the small fish the quack doctor had chopped up and popped it in his mouth. He had always taught her not to let food go to waste. Even by that standard it was a little embarrassing. This wasn't the pleasure district. In the rear palace he could be assured of decent meals. Nevertheless, Maomao didn't stop him. She knew this was simply her old man's nature. Liu Humin never forgot something once he had seen or heard it. From one simple fact he could deduce 10 more. He was a genius, the greatest doctor in the land. He didn't seem to know much about greed or ambition. He preferred personal simplicity. For him, a kitten's leftovers were as good as a feast. Maomao was preparing the mugwort she would use for moxibustion. She had already crushed it with a pestle and dried it thoroughly. The process was quite involved, and it would have been simpler to purchase it, but the ingredients grew in the rear palace. Moreover, it gave her a reason to visit the medical office. Maomao's daily tasks remained the same even with her father present. "We should have Maomao continue to do everything she normally does," Hongniang had suggested. The stubborn chief lady in waiting still could not reconcile herself to the presence of a criminal. Maomao had assumed this would leave her old man twiddling his thumbs in the medical office, but that was not so. Sometimes he was called away by a eunuch who came to summon him. Maomao suspected Jinshi was behind it all. Her father never revealed where he was going or where he had been, but Maomao could make a guess. There was at least one more pregnant woman in the rear palace besides Jayukayu. As long as he was here, Liu Humin would be obliged to treat all the consorts equally. Even though she was consort Jayukayu's lady, Maomao was relieved to know her father was making the rounds. She wanted consort Lihua's child to grow up healthy this time, and that began with a safe delivery. She had heard that after the departure of her former chief lady-in-waiting Shin, some older and more level-headed ladies had come to serve Lihua. They knew how to behave and probably had experience delivering babies. The rear palace held many relatively young women. These women arrived and departed every 2 years. The palace was intended to be a place for raising royal children, but it was not currently being used for that purpose. It was possible to argue the emperor should produce as many offspring as he could. The strongest should survive, fitting for a ruler's children, but considering the number of men in the current emperor's bloodline, that argument needed revision. To put it quite bluntly, there were not enough stud horses. If they could somehow fix that problem, her father was writing something as he munched on the fish innards. He was certainly well ahead of Maomao. Whatever she might think of, he had already thought of it himself. At the moment, he was making a list of points of concern in the rear palace. The quack picked up the kitten to stop her from interrupting Liu Humin's writing, then peered down at the list himself. "You do have the loveliest handwriting," he remarked. "That is what gets his attention." Maomao thought, well, the quack was who he was. Of course he wasn't interested in what it said. The written style is practically childlike. The quack continued with a chuckle, running his free hand along his moustache. "You are quite right. There are those here who can only understand simple sentences," Liu Humin replied. Maomao clapped her hands as it hit her, a vague intuition of what he planned to do. Her old man passed her the sheet of paper. "Did I miss anything?" he asked. "Offhand, I think it looks good." "Good, good," she thought she heard him murmur as he turned to the quack. "My dear Gen, do you happen to have some paper, perhaps half this size?" He folded the paper in half and held it up to show what he meant. Gen, who was that? Maomao wondered, but there were only 3 people in the room, so it must be the quack doctor. That name hardly sounded like him, she thought, and she resolved to continue thinking of him as the quack doctor. "Sure," the quack said. "We cannot use scraps like that. We pulp them and reconstitute them into new paper. Perhaps you might be willing to sell me some at a reduced price then. I certainly could." "It would be my pleasure, in fact." Liu Humin turned to Maomao. "I believe an Institute of Practical Studies recently opened here. Yes, that's right. Is everyone learning their characters well enough?" Well, that varied from person to person. But if you wrote carefully and clearly, virtually everyone would be able to read what you had written. I wonder if they might be able to use this for writing practice at the institute. Maybe you could suggest it. I doubt they would accept the idea coming from me, but they might listen to you. Maomao started back, caught between astonishment and exasperation. How willing was this man to use everyone and everything he could find? He was more cunning than a merchant. She thought his mental calculations were so developed. It was a wonder how he gave to charity when he himself was often starving. I will try asking him today, she said as she tucked the mugwort into a paper packet. Excellent, thank you. Then her father stood and left the medical office. She thought the room was for the bathroom. It was a bit of meaningless trivia, but becoming a eunuch meant one found oneself needing to urinate more often. That reminded Maomao she needed to go herself. She stood and opened a drawer of the medicine cabinet. I am going to grab a few bottles of alcohol, okay? Sure. Maomao had made the alcohol in the first place, so she found it hard to feel any compunctions about taking some for herself. However, when she had done it the day before, her old man had gotten angry at her. He clearly thought she should be more respectful to the doctor. Let's see, was there anything else she needed? Now she remembered Gyokao mentioning he had been having trouble sleeping recently. I would like some sleeping medicine as well. Is that all right? Certainly, take whatever you like. The doctor was completely absorbed in playing with the kitten. Maomao searched through the medicine cabinet, and this time she felt a little guilty. She thought something that won't harm a pregnancy. It wasn't unusual for a woman to sleep more lightly when she was pregnant. Maomao didn't need a strong drug, just a little something to help the consort relax. Perhaps this, she thought as she opened a drawer containing an herbal remedy. Suddenly she noticed Maomao the cat curled around her ankles. When had she gotten there? She tried to nudge the kitten out of the way, a little annoyed, but the cat ran her claws along Maomao's skirt. Stop, you'll tear it, the quack said, grabbing the kitten. Hey now, what are you doing? Was this what she wanted? Maomao looked at the herbs in her hand and wondered. The cat Maomao was mewling in a most unusual way. She was swatting at Maomao the woman with her little paw. Well, you cannot have it. The quack and Maomao's old man both doted on the kitten, but Maomao herself would not be so easily swayed. She was not going to give her precious herbs to a little furball. She quickly put them in a paper packet to keep them from the cat. I will be going now, she said, and left the medical office. Jinchi would most likely approve of what her old man was trying to do. Still, I suppose it would be polite to ask him in person. It would take days to go through Jinchi, though, so she was heading to the school first. That reminds me. The hair stick Jinchi had given her was in the folds of her robe. She had taken it out while she was working because consort Gyokao, Yinghua, Giyuan and Alan wouldn't stop grinning and teasing her about it. She would have to remember to put it back in later. She reached the school in the northern quarter before she had even finished thinking about how much trouble the hair stick brought her. The school was normally home to an elderly eunuch with a moderately insufferable personality, but he wasn't standing at the lectern today. He was the man who oversaw the shrine. This shrine was designed to determine the lineage of future emperors. He could be difficult to deal with, but talking to him would be quickest. He knew Maomao's father, and if she said Luhumen was here, it would likely speed things up. She walked through the hallways, heading for the eunuch's office. It was a short distance from the classroom. The door was slightly open. Are you here, sir? She called. She peeked into the room and found the old man squinting down at a book. He arched an eyebrow. When he noticed Maomao standing in the doorway, he gestured for her to come in, still holding the book. Is Zyrola not here today? He asked. He often instructed her in many different subjects. The bubbly and affable serving girl seemed to have charmed more than one resident of the palace. No, I am here on personal business today, Maomao said. She decided the quickest way to explain was to show him. She placed the paper Luhumen had written on the table. The old eunuch's eyebrow moved once more. This time he gestured toward a chair as if to say, sit. Maomao took a seat. This is Luhumen's handwriting, unless I am much mistaken. Very perceptive, sir. We all endeavored to mimic his writing back in the day. They said that if you could write as well as he did, you would easily pass the civil service examinations. That day must have been a long time ago, perhaps 40 or even 50 years ago. In this country, the civil service examinations were different from the test to become a doctor, but Maomao's father had passed both of them. He possessed the talents to have been a superb civil administrator, but he had seen a wandering child collapse by the roadside with illness. Pity moved him to choose the path of medicine. He had always been that way, and his personality, she had heard, had left him quite alienated from her biological father. Did he come all this way just to deliver this to us? The old eunuch inquired. No, sir, he is in the rear palace now. Well now. I hadn't heard. The old man's eyes, hidden among his wrinkles, opened wide. His surprise was clearly genuine. The northern quarter was somewhat of a wilderness in the rear palace, and word of new developments was evidently slow to reach him. Now that she thought about it, Maomao realized Xiaolan hadn't had much of a reaction when she saw Maomao's old man. The girls loved rumors and gossip, but after the arrival of so many handsome young eunuchs, one gnarled old man barely warranted her attention. So Xiaolan knew. She could have told me. I suspect all the much younger arrivals chased it right out of her mind. Ah, young eunuchs. The elderly teacher stroked his chin and gazed out the window. Beyond the carved circular portal was the shrine for discerning the children of Wang Mu, the Mother Royal, but that wasn't what the eunuch was looking at. He was staring somewhere beyond the portal. I know how little excitement there is around here, but still I question all the commotion over them. How's that, sir? Having all of the young eunuchs in the southern quarter would hinder work, so some of them were sent here. That made sense. Far fewer palace women visited the northern quarter. They went to assist at the clinic, and I understand they have been quite helpful. The clinic was another place with no young women. Instead, the staff consisted entirely of level-headed older ladies. Maomao could easily picture the palace woman she had met there. Shenel, wasn't that her name? Making good use of the eunuchs with her strong personality. Anyhow, back to the business at hand. What did you wish to ask of me? I wondered if it might be possible to use this as a sample for writing practice for the women at the school. We will provide paper for you to use. That caused the old man to raise an eyebrow. He then carefully examined the long, thin strip of paper. He wrote something similar to this a long time ago. He was doing it all by himself then, which was quite a task. Before I knew what was happening, I found myself helping him. I see the years have at least taught him how to make use of people. Compared to the help I gave him then, this is child's play. He wrote some sort of text like this before, certainly, and he posted it all over the rear palace. I never wanted to see the blamed thing again, and I wouldn't let him put one anywhere near me. The old eunuch shook his head, as if even today he would be loath to write that text out one more time. Maomao looked at the list of cautions on the paper. It included a brief remark about the toxic face powder, among other things. Had he published something like this before? The thought felt strange to her. She was seized by the desire to investigate. She put a paperweight down on the list and stood up, intent on following her feeling wherever it led. All right, we will bring some paper by later, she said. Oh, don't you want a cup of tea before you go? No, thank you, I am afraid I am in a hurry, she replied and left the eunuch's room. And with that she was off to Chapter 8, Festering Resentment Part 2. Just like the last time she had visited, the clinic was bustling with older palace women. Now among them were young eunuchs. Some of them were in the nearby laundry area washing sheets. They were laying the sheets on paving stones, treading on them with their bare feet, and dousing them with well water. Maomao took it all in out of the corner of her eye as she came up to the clinic entrance. A woman who knew her was there and came over to see what she wanted. Are you not feeling well? The woman asked. I'm all right, thank you, Maomao replied. She looked at the woman, wondering how to best handle this. She wasn't sure if it was appropriate to ask right now, but she also couldn't simply ignore the matter. She was most concerned about who had first thought of this idea. She decided to create a reason for her action. You use alcohol as a disinfectant here, do you not? I thought this might be useful. She took a small bottle from a cloth pouch. She had brought some alcohol, making a little extra just in case. She had always meant to take it to the clinic, but she kept postponing it. What is this? Maomao removed the stopper and tilted the bottle toward the woman. The woman took a sniff. I think this might be more effective than what you are using now, she said. After a moment the other woman said, "I will go ask," and led Maomao into the building. She led her to another room and offered her a chair. There was the forceful older lady Shenel. Maomao, evidently regarded as a guest, was offered some sour fruit juice. "We would be most grateful for this," Shenel said. "But are you sure it's all right? There wasn't much alcohol in the rear palace to begin with. There was even less distilled spirits. I have more." In fact, she had another bottle in her pouch plus more back at the medical office. And if all that ran out, she could simply make another batch. "I'll bring you some more later. That would help us very much." Shenel bowed her head. She sounded a little stiff, perhaps overly aware that Maomao was one of Consort Jayokai's ladies in waiting. "Please think nothing of it. I made plenty." By the way, Maomao was trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. However, acting had never been her strong suit. She wasn't quite sure if she sounded natural. All she could do was try to appear calm.